She discovers her husband's affair during a hospital visit, but when her billionaire brother shows up, the tables turn. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, her hand resting on her growing belly. The soft kicks from her unborn child filled her with a sense of joy and hope, feelings that had been harder to come by in recent weeks. 7 months into her pregnancy, she was no stranger to the emotional roller coaster of hormones, but the tension with her husband, David, had introduced a different kind of weight, one she couldn't shake as easily. "David," she called softly as she finished tying her shoes. "Are you ready? The appointment is in 30 minutes. David appeared from the bathroom, adjusting the cufflinks of his shirt. His tailored suit screamed professionalism, a reminder of the ambitious businessman she had fallen for. But today, his polished exterior felt more like a barrier than a charm. He gave her a distracted nod, barely glancing her way. "Yeah, let's go. Can't keep the doctor waiting," he replied, his tone clipped. Emma forced a smile, suppressing the sting of his indifference. The man who had once written her love notes on sticky pads and left flowers on her desk at work now seemed worlds away. She told herself it was the stress of his demanding job, but the pit in her stomach whispered otherwise. During the drive, Emma tried to fill the silence with light conversation. "I read last night that at this stage, the baby's ears are fully developed. He, or she, might even recognize your voice. Isn't that amazing?" David's eyes stayed glued to the road, and he muttered a non-committal, "Mm-hmm. Yeah." Emma studied him for a moment. His phone buzzed on the dashboard and he picked it up with practiced ease, glancing at the screen before flipping it face down. "Just work," he said quickly, anticipating her question. She wanted to believe him, but the warmth between them had grown cold over the past months. This was supposed to be a joyful time for them, a new chapter, a family on the horizon. But as they pulled into the clinic parking lot, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that David's heart wasn't fully in it. The waiting room was cozy, with cheerful pastel walls and framed photos of smiling babies. Emma filled out her check-in forms while David scrolled through his phone. Her eyes lingered on him as he leaned slightly away, shielding the screen from her view. When she placed the clipboard down, she mustered the courage to speak. "David, are you okay? You've been distant lately." He looked up, startled, and his expression softened just enough to remind her of the man she loved. "I'm fine, Em. Just work piling up. I'll try to be more present, okay?" She nodded, her heart clinging to his words even as doubt lingered. The nurse called her name, and Emma stood, taking David's hand. He followed her into the exam room, but his grip felt loose, hesitant. Inside, the doctor performed the routine checkup, and Emma's world brightened when she heard the rhythmic thumping of the baby's heartbeat. "Everything looks perfect," the doctor said with a warm smile. "Your little one is growing right on track." Emma's smile widened as she glanced at David, hoping to share in the moment, but he was already pulling out his phone. "Sorry, just a quick email," he muttered, stepping out of the room. The happiness in her chest dimmed as the door clicked shut behind him. She tried to focus on the doctor's reassurances, but her mind wandered. Outside the room, David's voice carried through the thin walls, muffled but unmistakably affectionate. "Yes, I'll see you tonight. I can't wait either," he said softly, his words laced with an intimacy that sent a chill down Emma's spine. Her breath caught. She gripped the edge of the exam table, her thoughts racing. Who was he talking to? Her instincts screamed that this wasn't work-related. The doctor's voice broke through her haze. "Emma, are you feeling okay?" She forced a nod, blinking back tears. "Yes, just a little lightheaded. Could I have a moment?" The doctor obliged, stepping out of the room and leaving Emma alone with her swirling thoughts. She felt the weight of uncertainty press down on her, heavier than ever before. David returned a moment later, his expression calm and collected as though nothing had happened. "All set?" he asked, offering her his hand. Emma stared at him, her mind replaying his whispered words. She took his hand, but the warmth she once felt in his touch was replaced with something colder, doubt, and a faint flicker of betrayal. As they walked out of the clinic together, Emma resolved to find out the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. The ride home from the clinic was marked by a tense silence. Emma sat with her hands folded over her belly, her gaze fixed on the passing scenery. David, oblivious to her turmoil, focused on the road ahead. Occasionally, his phone buzzed, and each time he glanced at it, Emma's chest tightened. She couldn't unhear his words from earlier. They replayed in her mind, twisting her thoughts into knots of suspicion and dread. When they arrived home, Emma lingered in the car for a moment as David went inside. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but her resolve wavered. The home they had built together, once a sanctuary of love and laughter, now felt like a stranger's house, a shell of what it used to be. Inside, David busied himself in the kitchen, his voice carrying as he spoke on the phone. "Yes, I'll wrap it up before the meeting tomorrow. Don't worry, I've got everything under control." His tone was casual, professional, but it did little to soothe Emma's growing anxiety. "Who was that?" she asked, walking into the room. Her tone was light, but her heart raced as she braced for his response. David turned, his expression neutral. "Just work. One of the team members needs help with a presentation." Emma nodded, forcing a smile. "You're always so busy." He shrugged, leaning against the counter. "That's what keeps the lights on, Em. You know that." Her smile faltered as she studied him. There was something in his demeanor, a detachment, a guardedness, that she couldn't ignore. She wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but fear held her back. What if her suspicions were wrong? What if they weren't? As the evening wore on, David retreated to his office, leaving Emma alone in the living room. She sat on the couch, her hands absent-mindedly stroking her belly as she stared at her phone. Her fingers hovered over the keypad, tempted to call her brother Alexander. He had always been her rock, the one person she could rely on when things went south, but asking for his help felt like admitting defeat, and Emma wasn't ready to go there yet. Instead, she scrolled through David's social media profiles, searching for anything that might confirm or dispel her fears. His posts were sparse and professional, offering no clues, but a notification caught her eye, a new tag from someone she didn't recognize. She clicked on it, her stomach sinking as she saw a photo of David at a recent work event, smiling alongside a woman Emma didn't know. The caption read, "Great to work with such an inspiring leader. Can't wait for the next project." Emma tried to rationalize it. The woman could be a colleague, a friend, but the way David stood next to her, his arm casually draped over her shoulder, spoke volumes. It wasn't overtly intimate, but it was enough to stoke Emma's suspicions. Her thoughts spiraled as she pieced together the fragments of evidence. His distracted behavior, the phone calls, the way he had pulled away from her in recent months. It all pointed to one conclusion, one she desperately didn't want to face. When David finally emerged from his office, Emma was waiting for him. "David," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Can we talk?" He hesitated, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Emma took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "I feel like something's changed between us. You've been distant, distracted. I can't help but feel like there's something you're not telling me." David's expression shifted, a flicker of guilt crossing his face before he masked it with a placating smile. "Emma, you're overthinking. It's just work stress. I'm sorry if I've made you feel otherwise." "Work stress?" she repeated, her voice rising slightly. "David, I heard you at the clinic. You were talking to someone, and it didn't sound like work." He stiffened, his jaw tightening. "You were eavesdropping?" "I didn't mean to." Emma shot back, her emotions bubbling to the surface. "But I heard enough to know that something isn't right. Who were you talking to?" David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Emma, I don't have time for this. I'm tired, and I don't want to argue." "That's not an answer," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm your wife, David. I deserve the truth." For a moment they stared at each other, the tension between them palpable, but David didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving Emma standing alone in the middle of the room. As the door to his office closed, Emma sank onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. The walls of their home, once filled with love and security, now felt cold and suffocating. She clutched her belly, whispering softly to her unborn child, "It's going to be okay. I promise." But deep down, she wasn't sure how she would keep that promise. The following day started like any other. Emma had scheduled her prenatal checkup in the early afternoon, a routine visit she'd grown used to as her pregnancy progressed. But despite the normalcy of the appointment, a sense of unease lingered in the back of her mind, like a dark cloud threatening a downpour. David insisted on driving her to the clinic, an act of care that momentarily softened Emma's doubts. He seemed attentive, almost overly so, as he opened the car door for her and made light conversation during the drive. Still, She couldn't shake the feeling that his actions were more performative than genuine, a veneer of concern masking something deeper. At the clinic, Emma settled into the waiting room while David stepped outside to take a call. He had assured her it was a work matter, but as she watched him pace back and forth through the glass doors, his posture tense and his gestures animated, her suspicions flared. The clinic's sterile walls and muted beeping monitors did little to calm her racing thoughts. "Mrs. Edwards," a nurse called, breaking her spiral of worry. Emma stood, clutching her purse tightly, and made her way to the exam room. The doctor greeted her warmly, asking the usual questions about her health and the baby's progress. "Let's take a look," the doctor said, gesturing toward the ultrasound machine. As the technician prepared the equipment, Emma glanced toward the door, half expecting David to walk in, but he didn't. Instead, she lay back on the table, focusing on the monitor as the cold gel spread across her stomach. The rhythmic sound of her baby's heartbeat filled the room, a steady reminder of the life growing inside her. "You're doing great," the doctor said, offering a reassuring smile. "The baby looks healthy and right on track." Emma smiled faintly, but her mind wandered back to David's phone call. She felt a pang of disappointment that he wasn't there to witness the moment, a milestone he would never get back. Was work really more important than their growing family, or was he avoiding the appointment altogether? When the exam was over, Emma returned to the waiting room to find David scrolling through his phone. His demeanor was calm, almost detached, as if he hadn't just missed a moment they should have shared. "How did it go?" he asked casually, not bothering to look up. "It went fine," Emma replied, her voice laced with an edge she couldn't suppress. "The baby's healthy." David nodded, offering a perfunctory smile. "That's good to hear." Emma's frustration boiled over. "David, do you even care?" she snapped, her voice trembling. "You missed the whole appointment. You said you'd be here, but you weren't." David blinked, caught off guard by her outburst. "Emma, I told you it was work. You know how demanding things have been lately." "It's always work," she shot back, her eyes filling with tears. "But this isn't just about me anymore. It's about our baby. And I feel like I'm doing this alone." David opened his mouth to respond, but his phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced at the screen, and Emma noticed the way his expression shifted. Subtle, but telling. His grip on the phone tightened, and he quickly silenced the notification. "What is it?" Emma asked, her voice sharpening. "Who's calling you?" "It's nothing," David said too quickly, slipping the phone into his pocket. "Just work." Emma's heart sank as the pieces began to fall into place. The late nights, the missed appointments, the phone calls he always seemed to step away for, it all pointed to one possibility, one she had been too afraid to confront. "David," she said, her voice trembling, "is there someone else?" His reaction was immediate and defensive. "What?" "No, Emma, of course not. Why would you even think that?" "Because you're not here, David," she said, her voice rising. "You're not present, and you haven't been for weeks, and every time I try to talk to you, you shut me out. So tell me the truth. Is there someone else?" David looked away, his jaw tightening. The silence that followed was deafening, and Emma felt the air leave her lungs as the truth settled over her like a weight. "Emma," he said finally, his voice low, "it's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is," she demanded, tears streaming down her face. "Because right now, it feels like my whole world is falling apart, and I need to know if it's true." David hesitated, and in that moment Emma knew. The confirmation wasn't in his words, but in his silence, in the way he couldn't meet her eyes. She felt as though the ground beneath her had crumbled, leaving her standing on the edge of an abyss. "I'm sorry," he said at last, his voice barely audible. Emma stared at him, her mind reeling. "You're sorry?" she repeated, her voice shaking with disbelief. "That's all you have to say?" David reached for her, but she pulled back, her fury igniting. "Don't touch me," she snapped, her voice breaking. "How long, David? How long has this been going on?" "It doesn't matter," he said, his voice strained. "It's over, Emma. I ended it." "Doesn't matter?" she echoed, her voice rising. "It matters to me, David. It matters because I trusted you. I thought we were building a life together, a family, and now you've destroyed it." David's face crumpled, but Emma couldn't bring herself to feel pity for him. She turned on her heel and walked out of the clinic, her heart pounding and her mind racing. The betrayal cut deeper than she thought possible, and for the first time, she truly felt alone. As Emma sat in the car, staring blankly at the dashboard, she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't do this by herself. She needed help, support, and a way to rebuild her life for her baby's sake, and she knew exactly who to call. Emma drove home in a daze, the events of the day replaying in her mind like a relentless, torturous loop. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel as she replayed David's admission and his hollow apologies. Every mile she drove away from the clinic felt like a step further from the life she thought she had. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself to keep going, determined to reach the sanctuary of her home. When she finally parked in the driveway, the weight of the betrayal hit her again. The house, once filled with dreams of a bright future, now felt like a cage, its walls closing in with memories of a love she now knew had been a lie. Emma sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the front door, unsure if she had the strength to walk through it. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, feeling the faint movements of the life growing inside her. That small flutter was her anchor, a reminder that she wasn't completely alone. But even the comforting thought of her baby couldn't silence the gnawing fear of what lay ahead. The first thing she did upon entering the house was collapse onto the couch, her body trembling as the sobs she had been holding back finally escaped. She buried her face in her hands, letting the grief and anger pour out unchecked. She had never felt so lost, so betrayed, so utterly alone. David's confession had shattered more than just her trust. It had shattered her sense of security, her belief in their future. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Could she confront him again? Would he try to make amends? Was there even a way forward for their marriage, or was this the end? The questions were endless, and the answers felt impossible to grasp. In her despair, Emma's thoughts turned to her family. She had always been close to her older brother, Lucas. Growing up, he had been her protector, her confidant, and her fiercest supporter. Even as his career had taken off, making him one of the wealthiest entrepreneurs in the country, Lucas had always made time for her. But their lives had diverged so much in recent years. His world of business and luxury felt light years away from her modest suburban life. They hadn't spoken much lately, and Emma had hesitated to reach out, afraid of being judged or pitied. Now, though, she felt like she had no choice. Lucas was the only person she could trust to understand her pain without judgment. The thought of calling him filled her with both hope and apprehension. Would he answer? Would he still be the brother who had always come to her rescue? Or would his success have made him distant and unreachable? With trembling hands, Emma picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found his name. She hesitated for a moment, her thumb hovering over the call button. What if he was too busy? What if he didn't pick up? But the memory of his comforting presence during her childhood pushed her forward, and she pressed the button. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Emma? Lucas's deep, steady voice was unmistakable, and the sound of it brought fresh tears to her eyes. Lucas, she managed to say, her voice breaking. I need you. There was a pause on the other end, and she could hear the concern in his tone when he spoke again. What's wrong, Emma? Are you okay? Is it the baby? Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. It's not the baby. It's David. Lucas's voice hardened. What did he do? She hesitated, unsure of how to put her pain into words. He's been cheating on me, she said finally, her voice trembling. I found out today during my checkup. He admitted it. The silence on the other end was deafening. When Lucas spoke again, his voice was filled with a controlled anger that made it clear he was struggling to keep his composure. Emma, where are you? Are you at home? Yes, she whispered. I'm coming over, he said firmly. I'll be there in a few hours. You don't have to, she began, but he cut her off. Yes, I do. Emma, you're my sister. You shouldn't have to go through this alone. I'll handle everything. The tears started again, this time from relief. Thank you, Lucas, she said softly. I don't know what to do. You don't have to do anything right now, he assured her. Just take care of yourself and the baby. I'll be there soon. When the call ended, Emma felt a glimmer of hope for the first time all day. Lucas's unwavering support was like a lifeline, pulling her out of the darkness. She didn't know what he would do or say when he arrived, but she knew she could count on him to stand by her side. As the hours passed, Emma busied herself with small tasks around the house, trying to distract herself from the pain and uncertainty. She folded baby clothes, reorganized the nursery, and made a cup of tea she couldn't bring herself to drink. Each tick of the clock brought her closer to Lucas's arrival, and she clung to the thought of seeing him as her source of strength. When the doorbell finally rang, Emma rushed to open it. Lucas stood on the porch, his tall frame silhouetted against the evening light. He was impeccably dressed as always, but his expression was one of concern and determination. "Emma," he said, stepping forward to wrap her in a warm embrace. She clung to him, feeling the weight of her grief lessen slightly in his presence. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "You don't have to thank me," Lucas replied. "You're my sister. I'll always be here for you." As he stepped inside, Emma felt a sense of safety she hadn't felt in weeks. Lucas's presence was a reminder that she wasn't as alone as she had feared. Whatever lay ahead, she knew she wouldn't have to face it by herself. Lucas settled into the living room, his sharp eyes scanning the space. Despite his typically composed demeanor, Emma could see the tension in his jaw and the tightness in his movements. He was furious, though not at her, but at the situation. "Start from the beginning," Lucas said, leaning forward, his hands clasped together. His voice was calm but firm, the kind of tone he used when he was ready to tackle a problem head-on. Emma hesitated. The pain was still raw, and she wasn't sure where to begin. "It started at the doctor's office," she said finally. "David was acting strange the whole time, avoiding eye contact and fidgeting. When the doctor left us alone for a moment, I pressed him about what was going on. That's when he admitted it." Lucas's face darkened. "He admitted it? Just like that?" Emma nodded, her hands wringing nervously in her lap. "I don't think he meant to. It was like the guilt just spilled out of him. He said he'd been seeing someone else for months." Lucas inhaled deeply, his chest rising as he visibly tried to contain his anger. "And what did he say about you? About the baby?" Emma swallowed hard. "He said he wasn't ready for the responsibility, that he felt trapped. He even hinted that he thought we rushed into starting a family." Her voice cracked and tears began to well up again. "Lucas, he said he loves her." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken rage on Lucas's part and heartbreak on Emma's. Finally, Lucas stood, pacing the room. "This man doesn't deserve you," he said, his voice laced with venom. "He doesn't deserve to be a part of your life or this child's life." Emma wiped at her tears. "I don't know what to do. I can't just walk away. We're married. We have a home, a baby on the way. How do I even begin to untangle all of this?" "You don't have to figure it out alone," Lucas said, turning to face her. "I'll help you. First, we're going to make sure you and the baby are safe and secure. Then we'll deal with him." Emma opened her mouth to protest, but Lucas held up a hand. "No arguments, Emma. You called me because you needed help, and that's exactly what you're going to get." She nodded reluctantly, her gratitude outweighing her pride. Lucas had always been the kind of person who took action, and she knew better than to try to stop him when he was in problem-solving mode. "Do you have access to your finances?" Lucas asked. "Joint accounts? Savings?" Emma hesitated. "We have a joint account, but most of the money is tied up in David's business. I only have a small amount in my personal account." Lucas frowned. "That's going to change. Tomorrow, we'll go to the bank and make sure you have what you need. In the meantime, I'll cover any immediate expenses." Emma started to protest, but Lucas cut her off. "Don't argue, Emma. This isn't charity. It's family." She nodded, too emotionally drained to resist. "Thank you," she said softly. Lucas sat back down beside her and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through this," he said. "I promise. But first, I need to know one thing." "What?" Emma asked. Lucas's gaze hardened. "Do you still want to be with him?" The question caught Emma off guard. She hadn't allowed herself to truly confront that thought yet. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to believe he can change, that we can fix things for the baby's sake. But another part of me, I don't know if I can ever trust him again." Lucas nodded, his expression softening. "You don't have to decide that right now. But whatever you choose, know that I'll support you. And if you do decide to leave him, I'll make sure you and the baby have everything you need." His words brought Emma a sense of relief she hadn't felt in days. For the first time since discovering David's betrayal, she felt like she could see a glimmer of hope on the horizon. Lucas's unwavering support was a reminder that she wasn't alone, and that she was stronger than she thought. Later that evening, Emma heard the unmistakable sound of David's car pulling into the driveway. Her heart raced, a mixture of anger and anxiety coursing through her as she prepared for the confrontation. Lucas, who had been helping her organize some baby supplies, noticed her reaction immediately. "Is that him?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Emma nodded. "Yes." Lucas's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. "Do you want me to stay, or do you want to handle this alone?" Emma hesitated. Part of her wanted Lucas to intervene, to unleash the anger she couldn't fully express herself. But another part of her knew she needed to face David on her own, at least initially. "I'll talk to him," she said. "But stay close, just in case." Lucas nodded, taking a seat on the couch, but keeping his eyes trained on the door. "I'll be right here." When the door opened, David stepped inside, his face a mixture of guilt and exhaustion. He froze when he saw Lucas, his eyes narrowing. "What's he doing here?" David asked, his tone defensive. Emma crossed her arms, standing her ground. "He's here because I needed someone to talk to. Unlike you, he's been there for me." David flinched, but he quickly recovered, turning his attention back to Lucas. "This is between me and my wife," he said, his voice hard. Lucas didn't move, his expression calm but unyielding. "Then maybe you should start acting like a husband." David glared at him, but Emma stepped in before the situation could escalate. "David, I need to know where we stand," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you even want to fix this, or are you already out the door?" David hesitated, his gaze flickering between Emma and Lucas. "Of course I want to fix this," he said finally, "but not with him here. Can we talk alone?" Emma looked at Lucas, who gave her a reassuring nod. "I'll step outside," Lucas said, "but I'm not going far." Once Lucas was gone, the tension in the room grew even thicker. Emma took a deep breath, steeling herself. "You say you want to fix this," she said, "but how can I believe you after everything you've done?" David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Emma, I made a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake. But I love you. I love our baby. I don't want to lose you." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "If you loved me, how could you betray me like that? How could you risk everything we've built?" "I don't have an excuse," David admitted. "I was stupid, selfish. I let my insecurities get the better of me. But I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Please, just give me a chance." Emma studied him, her heart torn. She wanted to believe him, to believe that their marriage could survive this. But the pain of his betrayal was still too fresh, and she wasn't sure if she could ever trust him again. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to figure out what I want, and whether I can forgive you." David nodded, his expression a mix of relief and regret. "I'll give you all the time you need. Just don't give up on us." As he left the room, Emma felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew she wasn't walking it alone. Lucas was there, and for now, that was enough. As David walked out of the room, Emma collapsed onto the couch, feeling emotionally drained. The weight of the confrontation pressed heavily on her chest. Lucas re-entered the room, his calm presence offering her a much-needed anchor. "Well?" he asked, his voice soft but curious. Emma let out a shaky sigh. "He wants to fix things," she said. "He says he loves me and the baby, but I don't know if I can trust him again." Lucas sat down beside her, his expression thoughtful. "Trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight, Emma, and it's not something you owe him just because he's asking for it." "I know," Emma replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's so complicated. We've built a life together. There's the baby to think about. I don't want to make a rash decision and regret it later." Lucas nodded, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "You're thinking about this the right way. But let me ask you something. If you weren't pregnant, would you even consider giving him another chance?" Emma paused, the question cutting through her swirling emotions like a knife. She thought back to all the times David had been distant, all the excuses he had made in recent months. The affair had been the breaking point, but the cracks in their relationship had appeared long before that. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe I've been holding on to the idea of us more than the reality." Lucas placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Emma, you deserve more than just an idea. You deserve someone who puts you and the baby first, every single day. If David can't be that person, then you need to do what's best for you." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, and she quickly wiped them away. "I just feel so lost. This isn't how I pictured my life. I wanted us to be happy, to be a family, and you can still have that," Lucas said gently. "It just might look different than you expected." Emma nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. I just wish I knew what the right choice was. Lucas leaned back, his expression thoughtful. You don't have to decide everything today. Take your time. Focus on yourself and the baby. Let David prove whether he's worth a second chance. The words brought Emma a sense of relief. For the first time since discovering the affair, she felt like she had a plan, or at least a starting point. Lucas's unwavering support reminded her that she wasn't facing this alone. Thank you, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. I don't know what I'd do without you. Lucas smiled, his expression softening. You're my sister, Emma. There's nothing I wouldn't do for you. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the bond between them stronger than ever. Lucas's presence was a reminder of the strength and resilience Emma had forgotten she possessed. With his support, she knew she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The next morning, Lucas took the first step in his promise to help Emma regain control of her life. He made a series of calls, using his vast network of contacts to ensure Emma had access to the resources she needed. From financial advisors to legal experts, Lucas left no stone unturned. When Emma woke up, she found him in the kitchen, a stack of papers spread out before him. What's all this? She asked, rubbing her eyes. Options, Lucas replied, gesturing to the papers. I've outlined everything from financial planning to legal advice. Whatever you decide to do, we'll make sure you're protected. Emma's heart swelled with gratitude. Lucas, I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to, he said, giving her a reassuring smile. We're family. This is what we do. As Emma sifted through the papers, she felt a renewed sense of hope. The path ahead was still uncertain, but with Lucas by her side, she knew she had the strength to face it. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she was taking back control of her life. David stared at his reflection in the mirror, his face pale and lined with regret. The confrontation with Emma and Lucas had left him reeling. For the first time, he was forced to confront the reality of his choices and the damage they had caused. He had been selfish, prioritizing his own desires over the family he claimed to love. Now, the risk of losing Emma and their unborn child loomed over him like a storm cloud. He paced the hotel room he had checked into after leaving the house, replaying every word of their argument. Lucas's accusations had been harsh but fair, and Emma's tearful expression haunted him. The weight of his guilt was suffocating, but he knew wallowing in self-pity wouldn't fix anything. If he wanted a chance to make things right, he needed to take action, and it needed to be genuine. David picked up his phone and dialed the number of a therapist he had found online. It was a small step, but one he hoped would show Emma he was serious about changing. After scheduling his first appointment, he sat down to write a letter, a heartfelt apology that he hoped would convey the depth of his regret and his commitment to becoming a better person. Emma found the letter in her mailbox the next day, a thick envelope addressed in David's familiar handwriting. She hesitated before opening it, unsure if she was ready to hear what he had to say. Eventually, she settled onto the couch and unfolded the pages, her hands trembling slightly. The letter began with an apology, one that felt more genuine than any of the words he had spoken in person. David admitted to his mistakes, detailing how he had allowed stress and temptation to cloud his judgment. He didn't try to excuse his behavior, but instead focused on how he planned to make amends. I know I've failed you, Emma, the letter read. I've failed our marriage, our baby, and myself, but I don't want this to be the end of our story. I want to earn back your trust, no matter how long it takes. I've started therapy to work on myself, and I'll do whatever it takes to be the husband and father you deserve. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she read. The words felt sincere, but sincerity alone wasn't enough to erase the pain he had caused. She set the letter aside, her emotions a tangled mix of anger, sadness, and a faint glimmer of hope. Later that evening, Lucas noticed her pensive mood. What's on your mind? He asked, sitting beside her. David wrote me a letter, Emma replied, her voice soft. He says he's sorry, that he's trying to change. Lucas raised an eyebrow. And do you believe him? Emma sighed, running a hand through her hair. I want to, but how do I know he won't hurt me again? You don't, Lucas said gently. But you don't have to decide anything right now. Let him prove himself, Emma. Actions speak louder than words. Emma nodded, appreciating Lucas's steady guidance. I just want what's best for the baby. And you will figure that out, Lucas assured her, one step at a time. Meanwhile, David threw himself into the process of self-improvement. Therapy sessions forced him to confront his flaws and patterns of behavior, and he began to understand the root causes of his actions. He also made an effort to distance himself from the toxic influences in his life, cutting ties with the woman he had been involved with, and setting boundaries with colleagues who encouraged his reckless habits. In addition to therapy, David volunteered at a local shelter, hoping to reconnect with the values he had lost sight of in his pursuit of success. The experience was humbling, and it gave him a new perspective on what truly mattered in life. But no matter how hard he worked, the thought of Emma and their baby remained at the forefront of his mind. He knew that his efforts might not be enough to repair the damage, but he was determined to try. A few weeks later, David approached Lucas, hoping to enlist his help. The two men hadn't spoken since their heated confrontation, and David was nervous about how Lucas would react. When Lucas answered the door, his expression was guarded. "David," he said coolly, "what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," David said, his tone earnest. "I know I don't deserve your trust, but I'm asking for your help. I want to prove to Emma that I've changed." Lucas crossed his arms, his skepticism clear. "And why should I believe you?" David met his gaze, his voice steady. "Because I'm not the same man I was a few weeks ago. I've been in therapy. I've been volunteering. I'm doing everything I can to be a better person. For Emma, for the baby, and for myself. I know I have a long way to go, but I'm asking for a chance to show her that I mean it." Lucas studied him for a long moment, weighing his words. Finally, he sighed. "I'll think about it, but if I see even a hint of your old behavior, you're done. Do you understand me?" David nodded, relief washing over him. "Thank you, Lucas. I won't let you down." As he left, David felt a renewed sense of determination. He knew he had a long road ahead, but he was willing to do whatever it took to earn back Emma's trust and rebuild their family. As the weeks unfolded, Emma found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. David's letter and the visible changes in his behavior weighed heavily on her mind. She didn't know if she could fully forgive him, but she also couldn't ignore the small signs that he was genuinely trying to change. Therapy, volunteering, and his consistent efforts to reach out through Lucas painted a picture of a man attempting to rebuild the pieces of his broken life. Lucas remained her steady pillar, offering advice without pushing her in any particular direction. He respected her autonomy, knowing that the decision ultimately rested with her. Emma spent countless nights reflecting on her future, her hand often resting protectively on her growing belly. She wasn't just making a decision for herself. Her baby's well-being was her top priority. One evening, while sitting on the porch with Lucas, Emma finally broke the silence. "I'm torn, Lucas. I don't want to put myself in a position where I could get hurt again, but at the same time, I see the changes in David. What if he's really trying? What if he can be the father our baby needs?" Lucas looked at her thoughtfully. "It's okay to be cautious, Emma. Trust takes time, and it's not something you owe him right away. But if you think there's even a small chance he's being sincere, maybe you can give him the opportunity to prove himself." Emma nodded, her fingers fiddling with the hem of her dress. "I don't know how to move forward. It's like I'm stuck between wanting to protect myself and wanting to see if he's capable of change." Lucas leaned back in his chair, gazing at the horizon. "You don't have to decide everything at once. Start small, set boundaries. If he's serious about this, he'll respect them. And if he doesn't, you'll know where he stands." The next morning, Emma decided it was time to have a conversation with David. She called him and asked him to meet her at a local cafe, a neutral space where she could speak freely. Her heart raced as she waited, unsure of what she was going to say. David arrived promptly, his appearance noticeably different. He seemed calmer, more grounded, and there was a humility in his demeanor that Emma hadn't seen before. He greeted her with a tentative smile, his voice soft as he said, "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." Emma nodded, motioning for him to sit down. "I thought it was time we talked. There's a lot that needs to be said." David folded his hands on the table, his eyes fixed on her. "I understand, and I want to start by saying that I'm sorry, Emma, for everything. I know words aren't enough, but I need you to know how much I regret the pain I've caused you." Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I've heard your apologies, David, and I can see that you're trying. But trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight. I need to protect myself and our baby. I don't expect you to trust me right away," David said earnestly. "I just want the chance to show you that I've changed. I'll do whatever it takes to be a part of your lives, even if it means starting from the ground up." Emma studied him, her emotions swirling. "This isn't just about us anymore, David. Our child deserves a father they can look up to. I need to know that you're committed, not just for now, but for the long haul." "I am," David said without hesitation. "I've started therapy to understand my mistakes, and I've cut ties with the people who were bad influences. I'm working on being the kind of person who deserves to be in your life, and our baby's life." Emma leaned back in her chair, her gaze steady. "Then here's how we'll move forward. You can be involved, but we're taking this one step at a time. I need to see consistency from you, not just gestures or promises. And if I feel like you're slipping, I won't hesitate to walk away." David nodded, his expression serious. "That's fair. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust." Over the next few weeks, David began to integrate himself back into Emma's life, carefully respecting the boundaries she had set. He accompanied her to doctor's appointments, where he listened intently to the updates about their baby's growth. He offered to run errands for her and made an effort to show up consistently, never pushing her for more than she was willing to give. Emma remained cautious but couldn't deny that David's actions were beginning to rebuild a foundation of trust. Lucas, ever protective, kept a close eye on David, ready to intervene if he sensed anything amiss. But even he had to admit that David seemed genuine in his efforts. One day, after a particularly emotional doctor's appointment where they heard their baby's heartbeat together, Emma turned to David with a small but significant smile. "I'm starting to believe you, David, but this is just the beginning." David's eyes filled with gratitude. "That's all I can ask for, Emma. Thank you for giving me this chance." As they walked out of the clinic, a sense of cautious optimism hung in the air. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a step toward healing and building a future for their growing family. Emma knew there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Months passed, and the once fragile connection between Emma and David began to strengthen, slowly but surely. With every step, David demonstrated his commitment, not through grand gestures but through consistent effort. He honored Emma's boundaries, prioritized her needs, and embraced the responsibility of impending fatherhood with a humility that surprised even himself. Emma, while cautious, couldn't ignore the changes in him. She had seen glimpses of this version of David during the early days of their marriage, but it had always been fleeting, overshadowed by his ambition and later his betrayal. Now it seemed genuine. Therapy had helped him confront his insecurities, and his volunteer work at a local shelter had grounded him in a way Emma hadn't thought possible. The arrival of their baby marked a turning point for both of them. Emma went into labor late one evening, and when the contractions became intense, she called David without hesitation. He arrived at the hospital within minutes, staying by her side throughout the grueling hours of labor. He held her hand, whispered words of encouragement, and wiped the sweat from her brow. When their baby, a healthy, beautiful girl, was placed in Emma's arms, the world seemed to pause. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at her daughter, her heart swelling with a love she couldn't put into words. David stood beside her, his expression a mixture of awe and gratitude. When Emma passed the baby to him, his hands trembled as he cradled his daughter for the first time. "She's perfect," David whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Emma, for her, for this moment, for everything." Emma watched him, her heart conflicted. She had spent months preparing herself to raise this baby on her own, but seeing David like this, vulnerable, present, and utterly devoted, made her wonder if they could truly create a new path together. In the weeks that followed, David threw himself into fatherhood. He changed diapers, rocked the baby to sleep, and even learned how to prepare formula under Lucas's watchful eye. Lucas, ever the protective brother, had initially been skeptical of David's involvement. But as time went on, even he had to admit that David's commitment appeared genuine. "You're surprising me, David," Lucas said one evening, as they worked together to assemble a crib in Emma's apartment. "I didn't think you had this in you." David paused, tightening a bolt before meeting Lucas's gaze. "I didn't either, but losing Emma and almost losing my chance to be a father made me realize how much I took for granted. I don't want to be that man anymore." Lucas nodded, his expression softening. "Just don't mess this up. If you do, you'll have me to answer to." David smiled faintly. "Fair enough." Emma, meanwhile, found herself grappling with her feelings. On one hand, she couldn't ignore the undeniable progress David had made. He was patient, attentive, and genuinely invested in being a good father. On the other hand, the scars from his betrayal still lingered, and she wasn't sure if she could ever fully trust him again. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, their baby sleeping peacefully in her crib, Emma decided to address the elephant in the room. "David," she began, her tone steady, "you've been doing everything right and I appreciate that, but I need to be honest with you. I'm still not sure where we stand." David looked at her, his expression somber. "I understand, Emma, and I don't expect you to have all the answers right now. I'm willing to wait, for as long as it takes." Emma studied him, her heart heavy. "This isn't just about us. It's about our daughter. She deserves stability, and I can't risk putting her through the pain of seeing us fall apart." David nodded slowly. "I know, and I promise no matter what happens between us, I'll always be here for her. She's my world, Emma. You both are." The following months were a delicate dance of rebuilding trust and navigating their new dynamic. David continued to show up, not just for their daughter, but for Emma as well. He respected her independence, offering support without overstepping, and slowly but surely, the walls Emma had built around her heart began to crack. Lucas, ever the realist, provided a grounding perspective. "You don't have to decide anything right now," he reminded Emma one afternoon as they sat on the porch. "Take your time. Let his actions speak louder than his words." Emma nodded, appreciating her brother's wisdom. "I just want to do what's best for my daughter." "And you will," Lucas assured her. "You're already doing it." As the baby's first birthday approached, Emma decided to take a leap of faith. She invited David to the small celebration she was planning, a quiet gathering with close friends and family. When he arrived, carrying a carefully wrapped gift and wearing an expression of quiet gratitude, Emma felt a flicker of hope. The day was filled with laughter, love, and moments that felt almost normal. David blended seamlessly into the group, his interactions with the baby and the guests demonstrating the man he had become. As the evening drew to a close, Emma found herself standing beside him, watching their daughter play with her new toys. "You've come a long way, David," she said softly, her voice tinged with emotion. He turned to her, his eyes earnest. "It's because of you, Emma. You and our daughter. You've given me a reason to be better." Emma smiled faintly, her heart full of conflicting emotions. "I'm not ready to make any promises, but I'm willing to try, to see where this goes." David's eyes lit up with hope. "That's all I could ever ask for." The journey ahead was far from certain, but for the first time in years, Emma felt a glimmer of optimism. With their daughter as their guiding light, she and David began to navigate the complexities of their relationship, one step at a time. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a hopeful beginning, a chance to rebuild, redefine, and perhaps even rediscover the love they had once shared. If this heartfelt story touched your soul, please give it a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more powerful tales like this. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next story. See you in the next story. See you in the next story.